There are a lot of Transformer characters from the Bayverse that I never expected to see get a really good modern figures. Skids and Mudflap are definitely near the top of that list, and yet, somehow, someone is actually doing it. A new third-party project is finally bringing the Revenge of the Fallen Ice Cream Truck twins back. And this isn't just another set of renders that we're going to forget about in a few months. We now have physical prototype. Mudflap has already been fully painted. Skid has a physical gray prototype, and both figures are being designed to transform individually and combine together into the ice cream truck from the movie. And honestly, this looks fantastic. What's especially exciting is that this project is coming from the same designer who worked on the Baiwei High Octane Bumblebee. That figure had one of the most promising working prototypes I have seen for Bayverse Bumblebee, at least for the 33 scale, only for the final product to make some pretty disappointing compromise. So seeing what this designer is doing with Skids and Mudflap has me really interested, because if the final production figures can actually live up to this prototype, we could finally have a modern version of the Revenge of the Fallen twin that feel like it belongs in a serious Bayverse collection. And before we get into these new figures, we need to talk about the old one, because surprisingly, the original Revenge of the Fallen Ice Cream Truck set is still pretty good. This was a toy released all the way back in 2009, and it somehow managed to pull off something that modern Transformer companies still struggle with, making the gimmick that actually worked. You had Skid, you had Mudflap, and you could transform them into their individual robot mode, and then you could combine them into the ice cream truck. For a toy of that era, that's honestly impressive. And even today, I think the old ice cream truck set still look really good. In fact, if you want an ice cream truck twin set that can visually work with the modern 33 collection, that old figure is still one of the best options we had. The problem is that the robot mode obviously showing their age, the proportion aren't particularly accurate by today's standard. The sculpting is much simpler, and there are plenty of compromise that come from designing a toy nearly 20 years ago. And that's where the new project come in. Because the first thing that stands out is just how much more like the movie character these new figures look. The robot mode have much more accurate proportion, much sharper mechanical detailing, a much more convincing interpretation of the CGI design. And I think Mudflap is the easiest one to appreciate right now, because we actually have a painted physical prototype. Once you see him in physical form, the difference becomes even more obvious. The face looks far more detailed, the body proportions are much closer to what we saw on screen, and all of the vehicle parts are integrated into the robot mode much more naturally. This doesn't look like somebody simply took the old 2009 design and made it bigger and more detailed. It looked like they went back to the actual movie design and rebuilt the character from the ground up, and Skid is looking just as promising. The actual sculpt and engineering are already there, and honestly, sometimes I prefer seeing a Ray prototype at this stage because you can actually see what's going on. You can see the joints, you can see the transformation panel, you can see where the vehicle parts are going, and you can start to understand how the two figures are going to work together. Because that combination gimmick is really the reason this project is so interesting. We're not just getting two new Revenge of Fallen robots, we're getting the ice cream truck. And I really hope people don't underestimate how difficult that is. You're essentially taking two completely separate transforming robots and designing them so that together they become one convincing vehicle. That's a very different challenge from simply making a car transform into a robot. And this particular vehicle had a lot of strange geometry because of how the two characters are packed inside. There are even additional wheels around the arm area that get split between the two twins during transformation. And that's the kind of weird little movie detail that I really appreciate seeing carry over into modern figures, because Bayverse design can be complicated enough already. And then you have a vehicle that literally contains two robots. It's ridiculous, but that's exactly why it works. The ice cream truck is probably one of the most memorable animals in Revenge of the Fallen, precisely because of how absurd it looks. You have got Optimus Prime, Ironhide, Ratchet, Sideswipe, and then these two little randoms show up disguised as an ice cream truck. It's peak Bayverse. And personally, I actually prefer the ice cream truck design to the individual Chevy track style vehicle mode. There's something much more fun about seeing this enormous and ridiculous ice cream truck sitting on the shelf next to all of your other MPM style vehicle. And apparently, that's exactly what this project is trying to accomplish. Now, this is where the scale discussion gets interesting. Because if you have seen people talking about these figures online, you probably notice some confusion. Are they 33 scale? Or are they MPM scale? Are they somehow in between? The designer actually gave us some pretty specific information. The two robots are approximately 10 and 11 cm tall respectively, measured from the feet to the top of their actual head. And yes, that means we're not counting the part sitting above their head, like the ice cream top. But here's the important part. The designer isn't really saying these are MTM scale robots. Instead, the robot modes are actually smaller than old dealer's class version. And the vehicle mode, however, is designed to have dimension compatible with MPM vehicle. So this is one of those situations where simply measuring the robot mode doesn't tell the entire story. And I actually think that it makes sense for these characters. They are supposed to be relatively small robots, but they're also supposed to combine into a fairly substantial vehicle. So trying to force them into a strict 33 or MPM label doesn't really tell us much. The designer has also said that the transformation difficulty is somewhere between 33 and MPM. And honestly, that sounds like a pretty good compromise. This guy is only around 10 to 11 cm tall, practically MPM scale, but still kind of smaller and shorter than common 33 dealers. You don't want to turn them into tiny engineering nightmare that take 30 minutes to transform. But at the same time, nobody buying a premium third-party figures wanting something that transforms like a basic mainline dealers. So somewhere between sound about right. And this is another reason why I think the project is better suited toward collectors who care about the movie design, rather than people simply looking for surgery replacement. Third-party companies have a difficult time competing directly with surgery. Surgery exists to give collectors a relatively affordable way to get a huge number of movie characters. Third-party companies don't have that advantage. Their figures are usually more expensive, and collectors expect significantly more detail and engineering in return. That's why I think MPM-style collector figures make more sense for a project like this. You have more room to work with. You can justify more engineering. You can focus on accuracy instead of trying to hit a mass market price point. And with a character like Ice Cream Twins, that extra engineering is actually useful, because making the two individual robots combine into one vehicle isn't exactly the simplest thing in the world. Now, another reason I'm particularly interested in this project is the person behind it. This is the same designer responsible for the High Octane Bumblebee project that eventually became associated with Baiwei. And if you remember that figure, you probably understand why I'm paying attention. The original working prototype was incredibly promising, and it was small, it was 33 scale. It had a really impressive scope and engineering concept. It looked like it could have been an amazing Bayverse Bumblebee. Unfortunately, the final figure ended up making some compromise that really hurt the overall presentation. The head sculpt was one of the biggest issues for me, the weapon was another, and then the scale. And that's frustrating because you could clearly see the potential from the original design. So with Skids and Mudflap, I'm really hoping the final company doesn't make the same mistake, because these prototypes are already looking good. You don't want to take something this promising and then chip out on the part that collectors are going to look at the most, like the head sculpt. The heads especially are extremely important here. And interestingly enough, some people have already noticed the head look unusually detailed compared to certain other areas of the prototype. There has even been speculation that the head files may have come from another source because of how much detail they have. Whether that's actually true or not, I don't know. But I do agree that the head look particularly sharp. And that's a good thing because the face are such a major part of the twin personality. These aren't characters where you can get away with generic head. They need to look like Skids and Mudflap. There are also some interesting detail planned for the final paint job. The designer has said that the weathering is likely to be added, although it's not completely finalized. Personally, I think these figures absolutely benefit from some weathering. This movie Ice Cream Truck is not exactly a brand new vehicle rolling straight out of the dealer. It's just super dirty, super beat up, and it's covered in grime. So, a good weather finish could make this thing look incredible. But I also understand why they're being cautious, because bad weathering can make a red figure look cheaply very quickly. So if they can get it right, I'd rather have the clean paint job and then force weathering myself. There's also a few hollows area that people have noticed on the prototype, and that's something I'm going to keep an eye on. But I'm not overly concerned yet. These are relatively small transforming figures. So, there are always going to be compromises where you try to fit two robots into one vehicle. At this point, I'm much more interested in whether the engineering actually works. And from what we've seen so far, it seems to do. Now, there is one thing that I want to be careful about. This is still an upcoming third-party project, and we have all seen this story before. Amazing render, amazing prototype. Everyone get excited and then the project disappears. So I'm not going to pretend that the existence of this prototype guarantee that we will have this figure sitting on our shelf this year. The designer has actually made it clear that this update doesn't mean the figures are releasing immediately. The current target is the end of this year, 2026, so there's still quite a bit of development time ahead. But the fact that we're already looking at physical prototype is still a very good sign. We well beyond her. Here's a cool render, maybe we'll make it someday, stage. And I think that's why this update is so worth talking about, because Skids and Mudflap are finally getting attention. Not another Optimus, not another Bumblebee, not another Megatron. Two characters that most companies probably wouldn't even consider safe investment are actually getting a serious collector-oriented project, especially when Hasbro is not even making them. And you know why. And I love seeing that because there are just so many Bayverse characters that deserve this treatment. And apparently, the designers might not stop with the twins. There have already been indications that Wreckers could be next, potentially starting with Roadbuster. And if that actually happened, I will be super excited. Imagine getting Roadbuster, Topspin and Leadfoot designed with the same level of attention. I absolutely take that over another 10 version of Optimus Prime. But for now, let's keep our expectation where they should be. Skids and Mudflap are still in development. The production version could still be changed. And most importantly, we haven't seen the final ice cream truck production sample yet. And I'm not ready to call this a definitive version, but I'm willing to say that this is probably the most promising modern attempt we have seen at this character, especially for the ice cream truck design. And that's saying something because the old 2009 ice cream truck set is still genuinely a good toy. The difference is that the new project looks like it takes the same basic idea and asks, what if we made it with almost 2 decades of advance in transformer engineering? And that is exactly what I want from third-party Bayverse figures. I don't necessarily need every character to be enormous. I don't need every figures to have hundreds of moving parts. I just want someone to look at this movie design and understand what made them special and give them the attention they never received. And Skids and Mudflap are the perfect example. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think about this project? Are you excited for another Skids and Mudflap?